Hi, everybody. We're back for another episode of We Burn Blue. I'm your co-host Sharan, and I'm here with Prashant. How you doing, Prashant?
Well, I'm doing all right, considering just recovering from a really bad throat. So, excuse me if I sound like a frog at times.
No worries, man. It sounds like you've been celebrating a few wins a bit too hard, man. But I don't blame you.
I mean, the Spurs game, who wasn't cheering in that game?
I know, I know. I mean, when I woke up and saw the result in the morning, I was like, it's just another crazy Chelsea game. So at least, touch wood, we've been very entertaining to watch this season, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are following us on the relevant socials like X, tracking our pods on Spotify and YouTube. But if you're not, give us a follow there and all those platforms, and you'll get to see, some pre-match sort of insights and do some polling and stuff like that. So it's quite fun and it's quite engaging. But yeah, so I guess so is Chelsea right now. Great team to be following. Why don't we do a quick recap of some of our favorite moments maybe in the last month or so?
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I think right at the top of the list is, of course, the Spurs game, which was the most recent Premier League game. I mean, we talked about it on the last pod. I said there's always, the players are always motivated to go out and beat Spurs. And even though we went down, the comeback was crazy, and I think 3-4, the final scoreline, was a great scoreline for us. I'm just pumped, man. I'm just really pumped after that.
Yeah, fair enough. And you should be because your predictions have been popping off every pod. I mean, it pays to be positive with Chelsea these days. So you must be
Yeah,
pretty happy
yeah.
about that.
I mean, to be fair, I did say that we would get a draw. I'd love a win, but I felt a draw was more realistic. And of course, Spurs' form has been, like we said, up and down. But hey, we got the win there. And I mean, all in all, every game we previewed on our last pod was a win. Even the Conference League games that you were talking about saying we might have draws, Astana and Heidenheim, were also pretty convinced. Well, pretty good wins. Two goal cushions. Astana was basically a development squad sort of outing with so many young players traveling. What did you make of those?
I thoroughly enjoyed that. I watched the replay, and it's great to see like Tyreek George actually come on and show that he can play at this level, at such a young age. You're looking at Carney getting some very important minutes as well. So I've said this in a previous pod. Enzo is basically treating this as if you would in Football Manager. We've already pretty much guaranteed qualification if everything goes well, right? Why not chuck a few youngsters into the squad and blood them in early?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, shout out to Josh Achimpong as well. I think he was the whole contract saga was just playing out, and he started at right back, and he was quite immense there as well versus Asnana. So yeah, I think like you said, Enzo Maresca is basically living every manager's dream right now in terms of the squad and the players he has to manage, and I think we're really seeing the benefits of that. So far, no complacency. So yeah, we hope that this run continues going into a busy, Christmas period. It's going to be a test of his managerial nous as well, the whole Christmas period, to see how he can navigate that. I suspect we're going to see more mixed lineups. It won't be just a straightforward team A, team B sort of situation.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense because we've got quite a few Premier League games coming up. But I guess we will get to that later in the pod. But what we did want to do this episode is kind of talk specifically about Maresca and his tactics. Maybe before we jump into the tactics, um, yeah, how do you think he's done as a manager this season? Do you think he's kind of exceeded your expectations, or you kind of knew he was going to have this impact on the squad so quickly?
I think he's doing better than I expected because honestly, I didn't have too many expectations. I said, okay, this guy has managed Leicester. They did they did perform really well, but then there was all this stuff about how he's very rigid in his playing style. He is not so adaptable. He tends to say, "This is how I want to play, and if you don't like it, well, I'll leave." That was sort of some of the stuff we were reading, but I was quite hopeful to see what he brings to the table, and I didn't expect us to be second. He's doing better than I expected, and I mean, it's the tactics part of it that I think I'm sort of beginning to understand more and more. We talk as well, and we're doing this part where I'm trying to see these patterns of play emerge. And one thing I can say is, from everything I've understood of him, he's not doing the same this season, where he's sort of been more adaptable. He's been changing his setup.
Yeah,
He's been changing his setup
absolutely, man.
really
Like
well.
he's definitely surprised me in that regard. His, like you said, adaptability is the right word, and he's actually changing his play style depending on the opponent. Relatively speaking, like it's not massive changes, but also I didn't know he had this level of man management, in him because, like you said, he has a relatively large squad, especially in the first sort of part of the preseason before we started offloading players. He had a bloated squad, but he seems to be managing players' expectations pretty well. I can only really off the top of my head think of João Felix kind of showing a bit of throwing a bit of a tantrum against Arsenal when he realized he wasn't coming on. But I can't really think of any other instances.
And Naughty Madueke too. I mean, I think it was the same game where he just came off and walked out in the tunnel. But anyway, that aside, yeah, Enzo's man management has been on point. And another thing that I think has been very, very refreshing is just how honest he's been. Like he doesn't hold back when he's asked questions. If someone's not performing, he calls it out. And I think he's made it very clear that week to week, game to game, it's down to the players to show up in training, and then they get picked ahead of other players in the squad. He said it a couple of times, and that sort of approach, even when it comes to questions about opposing teams and why he's made certain choices, he's just he doesn't shy back from it. It's just been very refreshing overall.
Yeah, it has. It has refreshing, but also I think not to drag this on too long, right? But you're talking about a very young group of players, right? Who have they're still kind of raw in terms of their football talent, but also they're quite immature in terms of as people, as adults, right? And Pochettino was a bit more laissez-faire. I don't think there was as much structure put in place. But at least in this early part of the season, I think that's what these kind of youngsters are benefiting from, right? It's structure on the pitch with the tactics and the expectations, but then also off the pitch, there's certain standards that need to be met, but also the sort of team A, team B. This is the way it's going to be, and you have to accept it. The manager is not going to put up with any nonsense, and yeah, I totally agree. I think from that regard, we are definitely seeing the upside for it. But anyway, I mean that kind of was just a bit of a digression into his non-tactical abilities. But I do think he was mainly brought into the club because he could kind of coach a tactical system into the team, into the players, right?
Yeah, I think you look at the hierarchy in the club, and the technical directors and sporting directors would have seen something in his approach that they said would work for the squad they were trying to build. So that way, I think he was brought in specifically. Yes, this is a squad of players we have. This is where we want to go. This manager is best suited to take these players from here to that point in the future. And so far, it's been working. I mean, I think you'd be any Chelsea fan who said, yeah, they were expecting to be second after what, 15 games or however many games it is, any Chelsea fan who says that is probably lying to you. But it is still way better than we were expecting. And the best part is it only looks like it's going to get better. Like you said over on Twitter, right? We've played now the big six, all of them, the traditional big six. We've had two wins, two draws, two losses. So you have your symmetry there. And that's just showing you that there's progress, right? Like we're already on course. If you look at, I was looking at transfer market, and if you look at last season versus this season, we had 18 wins last season across the whole season. So far, we're already at 9 wins. We're already on track to beat that, but I think it's down to how he's been setting up with and without the ball, and I know that's basically been you've been dying to talk about this. So let's get into it. I mean, you want to maybe talk a little bit about how Maresca set up, what the expectation was coming in, what was it that actually made him attractive to the hierarchy in place.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, and then
it was mainly to do with how City were playing, right? Guardiola was dominating games with his system. But obviously, he has great individual players, but the idea of this, 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1, kind of switching into a 3-2-5, that was the I think the main attraction, that the ownership probably saw that, look, we've got quite a versatile group of players, and this seems to be a very strong system. And Maresca demonstrated that he knew how to implement the system at Leicester in the Championship. But like you mentioned earlier, when we first appointed him at the top of the summer, all of the kind of analysis of him was done on the tactical basis. It had nothing really to do with his man management skills, or maybe his ability to manage outwards to, like you say, with the journalists, but also with the board, or any player recruitment sort of stuff. It was all focused on the tactics.
yeah. So you said it was a 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 converting into a 3-2-5. What else were hallmarks of his Leicester team tactically that, we're seeing, or what are we seeing in this Chelsea side, and what are the things that he's dropped and he's kept to the side and said, okay, I'm gonna do differently with Chelsea now.
I think one of the hallmarks which we are also seeing right now at Chelsea is the goalkeeping, or the goalkeeper rather, just stepping out of his box to kind of join the defenders in keeping the ball. And for better or for worse, that is definitely one of the hallmarks of this system. Um, I, I think you can kind of predict what I'm going to say about Sanchez and the effectiveness of that, but nevertheless, it's quite an important aspect in the build-up. So it allows you to keep the ball while the other team's pressing a little bit more effectively. But aside from that, like, we are seeing a few differences. We're seeing, like, at Leicester, he used to invert one fullback into the defensive line and one into the midfield line. Now we're sometimes, or a lot of the time, seeing Gusto, when he's fit, invert all the way into the attacking midfield, which I'm not really sure again whether that's been effective. He's kind of allowing his let's say two number tens in the five up front. He's allowing them to drift outside of the opposition's defensive structure, as opposed to at Leicester, he was trying to keep them as central as possible, and keeping them in a box shape, which again, I'm not sure how effective it's been at Chelsea. I think we've seen that when Enzo kind of stays more central and makes those runs into the channel, and same thing for Palmer, they become more effective because they're getting the ball higher up the pitch, and they're pushing the defensive lines back. But I mean, these are all kind of nuances that he's slowly figuring out at Chelsea.
Okay, so in terms of style of play, then, what do you think of his setup so far?
I mean, you know what? It's surprising because, again, when we first appointed him, a lot of Leicester fans were kind of warning us, saying that, look, we may win games, but we'll be very, boring to watch. Slowly passing the ball, just trying to maintain possession in order to control the game. It's it. The expectations were not very high in terms of, for attacking football in that regard. So that's why I say it's surprising, because I think that's been our most effective way of actually scoring, especially against, like, look at teams like Newcastle or Brighton. It's just hitting them on the break so quickly. So I'm happy and also surprised that he's allowing us to kind of continue with that more direct style of play. which definitely was not evident at Leicester. And this is where you have to give him credit for understanding that look, the players are different. He's got people like Jackson and Madueke and Neto who are absolutely rapid, and then you've got great passers of the ball like Palmer, Enzo, etc. So for me, that would be you know the key difference between what he did at Leicester and what he's doing now. I don't know if you've noticed the same tendencies, but for me at least, it has been surprising.
Yeah, no, I like I said at the top, right? I did hear that he was very rigid in his approach. Leicester would basically hog possession entire opponents that way, and there wasn't a lot of attack fluid football. But I think, yeah, he has been very adaptable. He's taken, in some ways, this is something I think Pochettino wanted to set up or had as a vision to have that fluid attacking play. I think combining what Pochettino was trying to do, maybe he saw the systems in place or whatever. I don't know the nitty gritties of it, but he's sort of been able to he's been able to find that balance and use his knowledge and get the best out of the system. And there has been a lot of flexibility. Like we said, there's been different setups versus different opponents. There is a traditional team A, team B, yes, but we've also seen him like he's deployed Caicedo at right back because of the opponent we're facing. So I want to ask you, in terms of then, how he's been approaching the setup tactically, what we've been doing in possession, the transition plays, what we're doing in defense. How do you rate that, and what are your thoughts on that? And how do you also, this will be probably a follow-on, how do you then think things like Caicedo at right back? Are they are they long-term solutions, or are they just because he feels Gusto isn't right for that particular opponent?
That's the $1 million question, right? Uh, how long can we persist with Team A, Team B, and how long can you continuously adapt to different opponents before you require some consistency in at least your starting 11 and their positions and their roles, right? And I think we'll get to that level where teams will show us even more respect and drop off deep. But in the meantime, we don't see that happening. So, yeah, I guess right now, since it's a transitional season for us, we will continue to see him tinkering each game. Just to answer your kind of first query, with the ball, we're seeing predominantly a 3-2-5, but sometimes we're setting up in a 3-1-6. What that means is you have a back three, keeping the ball right, with one pivot player in front of them. Generally Caicedo, but actually in the Conference League we've seen Casadei do it, and then you've got a front line of six. This has been utilized mainly against weaker teams or teams he expects to drop deep, right? And therefore, it's creating one more option in the front line for us to play through. But yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to what he had shown last season, which is he likes to build with the three, and then either it's two or one in midfield, and then a front of five or six. And in terms of transitions, I mean, we know we need to improve in transition in defense, but also like in our defensive positions as well. Once we settle into that 4-4-2, I think it's quite easy to get at us. But even our counter press, I again we have one possession a lot in the other half. I haven't looked up the stats, but the eye test me is kind of saying we're pretty good. But I still think we can do better, or we can kind of be smarter in transition and sometimes drop off because I think you'll have noticed this as well. I'm sure you've seen a lot of games where weaker teams. I mentioned this in a few pods ago that teams like Noah, once they catch us on the transition, actually our defense looks pretty exposed. And this happens especially when you're building up with that 3-1-6 because you're essentially moving one midfielder forward. So yeah, I think I'm not sure if you've noticed the same kind of flaws in our defensive transitions, But there were games where Fofana and Colwell, for instance, also looked exposed.
No, definitely I have. Yeah, I think now that you're saying it, I'm it's true. Like when we do put that one player extra in the attack, if we lose possession cheaply up there, we're very quickly countered and we find ourselves in the back foot. And then those are situations where then under pressure, Cowell or Fofana are doing something rash, whether it's a late tackle or just gifting the ball away again, recycling possession in a very with bad clearances and stuff, and then we almost always find ourselves conceding a chance on goal or conceding a corner. So I definitely see that, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, attacking transition I already covered, right? I mean, this is where I've been surprised the most by Maresca this season because he's willing to play more direct. But most of the time, you can see actually that he still wants to build up in his way. I think he's just kind of accepted that we can't always play that way for the whole 90 minutes. And I think that's again that's a manager admitting that look, like if we try to play slow the whole time, you're increasing your predictability. And I think that's the key point here is that he understands the need to be unpredictable, with his tactics.
Yeah, fair. I think while that's true, I think also that he says he likes to control the games, and I don't think controlling games always has to mean slow build-up play. Like you can control it with very fast transitions and, looking for like the fact that Colwell and Fofana ping some really nice long balls over the back and have, connected with Jackson, and he's also been able to sort of hold his line better than last season. I mean, if it was Jackson last season, half the chances that he scored, he'd probably have been offside last season, right? So I think considering all of that, there is maybe some intent behind that as well, where in that control, he knows when he's telling players, okay, we need to turn the screws, quicken the tempo, and okay, now we can sort of calm down and, hold the ball a little bit and play it around from side to side and wear them down. So I think that might be intentional. I mean, again, I don't I'll say it again. I don't have the tactical eye you do, but this is just what I've seen, and the versatility that he's been getting out of the players and the freedom with which he's okay to like Pedro Neto swap swings mid game, with the subs and all of that. I think that's all him recognizing that, like you said, he has a very versatile squad at his disposal and he's basically trying to play to their strengths, right?
Yeah, I like that's an interesting point because I agree up until a certain point. I think this versatility thing will run its course. There is a limit to it, and it's this game is absolutely about getting the right players in the right places. If you do that, you're increasing your chances of winning, right? And that's how you develop your tactic and your strategy. And we saw like a prime example is Gusto against Liverpool, and then Gusto in other games where maybe he's also playing in attacking midfield. It nullifies us as a threat. So that's when you got to wonder: is the impetus that's placed on unpredictability and versatility, right? Is that actually nullifying us? Is it now working against us? So, and the other thing I want to point out is there will come a time where teams will decide, you know what, we're not capable of pressing high up against this Chelsea team because Palmer and Enzo are floating, because Caicedo is drifting and Gusto is changing positions all the time. It's better we sit deep. And that's when you're going to need players, you know, functioning in similar kind of roles because they will need to build a different type of chemistry in order to break, like, let's say a deeper block down, you know? So yeah, so this is why, I've been thinking recently, let's say, next starting next year in January, teams decide like, you know what, we're gonna drop deep and just play a block of two blocks of four or 4-5-1 or something like that against Chelsea and just defend in our half. How would I set up against them at least to start with, you know? And for me, it starts way from the back. You have Jorgensen, who, I mean, he's benefiting from Sanchez playing. It's a weird one, but I think you would agree with me there, right?
Yeah, basically, I'm. I think we keep saying it's just a matter of time before Sanchez is dropped in the league. Jorgensen is really he's looking stronger. I mean, we did concede versus Astana, which is not something that, you would expect if we were controlling the game. But that said, yeah, I think Jorgensen should be starting. I mean, we've been over this too many times.
Yeah. So again, Jorgensen for me has also shown he's a lot more comfortable with the ball at his feet. Again, he's been playing low pressure games, etc., etc. But anyway, moving forward, we have Gusto playing right back, Fofana playing right centre back, Colwill left centre back, and Cucurella gets a nod for me at left back. But the thing is here with the inversions, right? I'm not asking Gusto to invert. I think his skill set is speed, running box to box, but on the wing, where he's able to go past players on the outside and most of the time putting in a cross. And I think this kind of mirrors Reece James's abilities as well. His crossing is basically second to none. It's just a question of whether he can stay fit. So for me, you've got two out and out kind of winger right backs who should be given that kind of right wing position. And Fofana and Colwill, you've seen them do this. I'm not making any radical changes here. Colwill plays a little bit more centrally while Fofana kind of covers that right back area. And Cucurella inverting into the kind of left back area. So that's essentially your back three in the 3-2-5. And going slightly further forward, I think the kind of sitting pivot player has to be Caicedo. I mean, he's borderline world class now. He's definitely up for that discussion. So it's a no brainer. And you have him towards the right side to kind of help Fofana cover that right back area. Because, yeah, we want him kind of breaking up play while Gusto or James is kind of getting back on transition. And next to him, very controversial opinion, but I think everyone's aware, whoever's listening. But I think Enzo and Caicedo can work together as long as Caicedo doesn't move too far ahead of Enzo. But I have them sitting together in midfield. So again, no one's inverting into midfield, no one's leaving these pivot positions. Caicedo and Enzo are both sitting. Enzo has maybe a little bit more license to go forward in games that require it, but yeah, he's basically there to recycle possession and play some more killer passes from deep. And then I can hear you asking, so where does Palmer play? For me, he starts right wing, but he kind of drifts into the right half space, which is kind of where he's at now. But one key point that I made earlier was, he drifts out to receive the ball. He drifts deep to receive the ball and wide quite a lot, where I would ask him kind of to stay more centrally, because it will actually add a little bit more balance. It will create a little bit more space for Gusto, for instance, to get in behind and actually hit crosses from a byline position, rather than kind of Palmer dropping off and receiving instead of Gusto on the right hand side. And so since Palmer's kind of starting right wing and drifting into right half space, I'd have Nkunku actually starting as my number 10. And this may be a bit attacking, but I'm kind of saying that, look, as we go forward and as teams start to show us more respect, this is where I'm taking a bit of a risk. So with Nkunku at number 10, I think he adds another option centrally, in terms of like creativity, finishing, movement, etc., etc. I mean, we've seen the guy's skills, and what that does is it kind of means that, okay, if Palmer is tight marked today, right, against an opponent, you've still got Nkunku, who's basically got an extra bit of space because midfielders are tracking Palmer the whole time. So for me, in that 3-2-5, the front five would be Gusto on the right wing, Palmer on the right half space, and Kunku on the left half space. And to finish off on left wing, I would probably have Neto. But if we're really struggling, or if Neto's injured, Sancho, because I think these last few games he's shown that he does have the drive, and he also has the defensive kind of uh, capabilities. He does track back, and he doesn't seem to make any qualms about it. He's quite happy to do it, and he does it a lot. So, and of course up front you have Jackson. I think Nkunku, Jackson, and Palmer as a three, kind of centrally, they can cause real issues. So I mean that's how I would do it, at least as a 3-2-5.
I like the sound of it. I'm not gonna lie. I think I would really like to see that Palmer and Kunku Jackson um, trifecta attacking because it sounds like there'd be a lot of, or feels like there'd be a lot of like movement and quick, slick passing there. But so Enzo and Caicedo also, I can understand sort of the logic. You say and Caicedo shouldn't get too far ahead of Enzo, but recently Caicedo has been getting up front as well. It's Lavia who's been sitting back in that defensive role, right? So I like the thought behind this. I also wanted to ask you a couple of things. So let's go through it place by place, right? So in defense, a line, but we've also talked about the lack of height and maybe sort of aggressiveness, and also maybe a little poise on the ball, where Fofana and Cole will tend to be a little bit erratic at times. So you you wouldn't like to see maybe a Disasi or a Tosin starting ahead of maybe Fofana on the right there?
I mean, on the right, uh, Fofana's got the legs, We're talking about leaving quite open spaces. So for me, his pace is the reason why he starts. I do think he can be a bit reckless in the challenge, and yeah, he's definitely lacking aerially. But the, nobody's perfect. I think Tosin or Disasi, obviously, if they're starting in the Prem, they will more often than not get exposed, especially in that right centre back area. So yeah, I'm not sure if you necessarily agree with that. Are you saying you would rather have? I mean, would you have Reece James there? Is that what you're suggesting? Is that a possibility?
No, I'm just playing devil's advocate. That's all. I haven't thought about this as much as you have. I wouldn't like to see Reece James there because I think you really nullify his attacking ability. I think if he's on the pitch, he needs to be in a place where he's able to contribute going forward as well. So, though, yes, in this system, you do see Fofana getting up quite a bit, picking up the ball at the halfway line, especially when we're really in control of games. So maybe Reece James could do well there, but my intention is just to play devil's advocate here. Like when we talk about the mid again, like I said, Lavia and Caicedo has looked strong. Enzo has been coming on a little later, playing more attacking. But yes, we do know Enzo likes to be a sort of DLP, and dictating play. So the Caicedo Enzo pivot makes sense, right? It's just that if there is an opportunity where Caicedo gets up, is Enzo able to do the defensive cleanup that Caicedo would have done if he was the last man there, right? That's a concern. With Palmer on the right wing shifting to the right half space, again, I understand that completely. We've talked about how Noni's eating into his space already, and that makes sense. Nkunku as a CAM, as a number 10 behind the striker, honestly, that's something expected we would see at some point, and I'm surprised we haven't seen it by now. He's been doing great to get goals as a striker, but he is a player of immense quality, and I think it's a shame that we have to use him in the team B, and he comes on so late in games. He can impact a game, right? So this might be the best way to unlock Nkunku as well. Neto for me deserves to start ahead of Sancho, Mudrik, and Madueke as well. But then we've talked about Sancho. Yes, he's been showing that he has that spark, he has that creative class. What about the likes of Mudrik and Madueke, right? Because in this system, right, it's pretty clear that we are then at least one of those is surplus to requirements if we build a system like this. So, Mudrik or Madueke, who do you see um, being able to fit in this system and actually impact the team in the long run?
So yeah, you're asking a pretty tough question. I can't in good conscience get rid of Madueke because for me he's the first guy on the bench. He's like, this is your starting 11 every week, week in, week out. Madueke is coming on to try and make a difference, right, on that right wing, and Sancho for me comes on at left wing. So I'm looking at Mudrik. As tough as it is to say, you know, but you've got Felix who can definitely step in at and replace Nkunku or Jackson if needs be, right? But really, I mean, there's not much room for Mudrik.
Okay. And this is a 4-2-3-1 that transitions into a 3-2-5. Do you still see him looking to set up with the 3-1-6?
That really depends, like if let's say this 3-2-5 is not effective, or we go a goal behind and he needs to push forward, then you switch to the 3-6-1. I mean, there will be certain games where he might decide to just start on full attack mode and really make that gamble. But then again, for me, I would just have, like, if we're really saying that, look, we either need the goal or the opponent is that much weaker and we can start off as a 3-1-6, sorry. I think for me that's when Enzo sits and Caicedo goes into the right attacking mid. And Palmer then just sits as a number 10. That's how you create your front line of six, essentially, or the line of five behind Jackson. Because I truly believe Enzo doesn't really belong in that kind of final third area. His him getting to balls and controlling it in tight spaces, it's not great, especially when that's the highest amount of pressure he'll receive. I think he's much better outside, in between the opposition's attack and midfield.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think. So, 3-2-1. Yeah, that makes sense. I think we will see the 3-1-6 in some games for sure. And hopefully we're able to tighten up the defense and not look so exposed on the counters when we do. But okay, last question from me. What do you make of his decisions to play players out of position? So we talked about Caicedo at right back. There was a game some time ago when Reece James was fit in the middle where he played at left back, I think it was, and Gusto was at right back, and we had Cucurella fit then. So he did play a right back at left back when there was an available left back. What do you make of those decisions that he's been making? And do you think that those are just, again, to counter maybe certain things that he's seeing from the opponent? Or why do you think he's making those sort of calls?
So I mean, I think first of all, you play Reece James when he's fit because you never know how many games he's going to give you. I think that's the approach that we saw at that time. And again, he's out. Also, I think it's to do with managing the minutes. These guys are playing a lot of games internationally as well. So, for instance, that game Cucurella missed, I think it was because he had come back from internationals, having played both games for Spain, and Reece James was fit. So, see my earlier point. In terms of doing it that way, that's fine, man. Because on paper they start Reece James starts at left back, but he's sitting more centrally than he's not like, let's say, hugging the touchline, right? Similarly, Caicedo from right back into right center mid, which I think you will see that consistently going forward, right? That's an actual prediction on what Maresca will do going forward. That's fine, right? Because Caicedo today is a great defender. He's very mobile, and his attributes actually can fit at right back in terms of defending, and also he's then inverting into right central mid. what that's doing essentially is allowing Enzo to actually get one more attacker into the system, right? So that's how you're getting Madueke and Palmer onto the pitch, onto that right hand side, essentially.
So you're saying we'll see Caicedo starting at right back more ahead of Gusto and Reece James when he's fit.
I think so. I mean, Gusto's effectiveness on the ball, I mean, I have serious doubts about that. That's why I think he belongs on that right wing until he matures. He's still a young guy, and hopefully
I was just
Maresca's
gonna say,
exactly.
yeah, I was just gonna say he's a very young player and he still has ways to mature. But okay, so I don't know if I agree with Caicedo at right back just because I feel like we're saying he's the holding the deeper lying defending midfielder in the pivot, and then we're also saying that he could be playing more at right back. So it seems to be like a lot happening with that one player.
Well, not Danilo, Ricardo Pereira did the same last season for Leicester. And again, they're different players, obviously, but again, it all depends on a player's attributes. I think Caicedo is fast enough to play at right back, but that's in defense, right? In possession, he's going to move centrally, which is where he's best because he's very good at turning the midfield and laying balls off and flicking the ball around the corner. So I'm not saying it optimizes him completely because yeah, I think Gusto's probably still a better right back. But like I said, I think Maresca's looking at the trade off, saying like, okay, so this is how I'm going to be able to get Lavia and Enzo on the pitch together with Caicedo and Madueke on the right wing with Palma. You know?
Yeah, I was gonna say if you did that, then that means Lavia is then starting in that defensive midfield role ahead of the back three. Yeah, so I mean it's interesting. That's a very interesting one for me, and I'd love to see how it goes because I like the idea you have with your ideal 11, and obviously we've seen Maresca shown. We've said it already. He's shown a lot of adaptability, a lot of flexibility, trying different approaches. And in my view, the upcoming run, the Christmas period with, back-to-back fixtures, the FA Cup coming in, this is where we're going to see a steady core 11 emerge. And I'm really curious to see how it goes versus where you think it should go.
Yeah, I mean, like only time will tell. Uh, but like you say, the next step is the next phase in this team is to develop some consistency, right? So I have a question for you, right? There is a team A and a team B. You can predict which personnel are going to be in which one most of the time. Which team B player would you like to see in team A? Like for me, the
Nkunku.
way I had developed this 11 was basically to offload some of the pressure on Palmer, and I looked at Nkunku and I said, if these two guys are sitting behind Jackson, we're gonna murder some teams, you know?
Yeah, it's Nkunku for me as well. I think that's an easy answer. The rest of the players, I mean, if you look at your wingers, Neto, Sancho, Madueke, Mudryk, right? Those being the four key wingers. You're already seeing them in and around. They're already there's a lot of movement between the traditional or between Team A and Team B with those guys. But if there's one player I think I would like to be seeing starting in the Prem more, it's Nkunku for sure. So that's one of the reasons I like your system the setup that you have in mind, and I'd like to see. I would love to see how it plays out in on the pitch as well, not just on paper. On paper, it sounds great, but on the pitch, how would these guys play in this system with this 11? It'd be interesting to see, really.
But yeah, like you mentioned, I think there's a fair few games coming up for us now. Especially in the Prem. How do you think we're gonna fare this December?
Yes, yes, yes. Prediction time. I think it's gonna be. An interesting one. So, shall we kick it off then with our next fixture? That's Brentford at home. For me, I think given the form we're in, it should be a win. But Brentford have also been looking quite strong and they've been scoring goals for fun, it seems. What do you think?
We should win, and yeah, for a change, I'm gonna predict that we win.
Okay, okay. And then we have Shamrock Rovers in the last Conference League group match. If I'm not wrong, that's the last one of this phase. So win, easy one. Yourself?
Yeah, yeah. I think we move on to Goodison.
Yeah, on to Goodison then. Goodison, so we missed the Merseyside derby because of bad weather. So Everton will be a little more rested, I think, coming into this. But I still think, given their form, we should beat them. It's Everton, and we tend to have good games versus them. Some really high scoring games as well. I think there's no reason this shouldn't be another one of those.
I mean, our record at Goodison Park is terrible, and I don't see it changing because I think Sean Dyche has really got it in for Chelsea, and this is where you could actually say the same thing about Brentford, but I have a feeling home advantage might count in our favor for that. But they'll make Everton will definitely make their size count. You might see appearances from slightly larger players, like maybe Vega in for Cucurella at left back, or Tosin in for Fofana or Disasi in at that right back spot, right centre back.
Interesting. So you're calling a draw?
I think they'll beat us. I'm calling Everton to win.
Okay, okay, let's see how that goes. And then we have a Boxing Day derby, Chelsea versus Fulham.
We have to win this, dude. We have to win this, man. After all of the hype, and Fulham are having a pretty decent season as well.
Yeah, they are.
But yeah, we need to beat these guys.
Yeah. Fulham, I think, are being buoyed by the ex-Arsenal Smith Rowe, right? He's really doing well for them, I think.
Yeah, and it will be as usual having a good season. He's
Yeah.
now become very consistent or somewhat consistent. So it won't be an easy game, but it'll definitely be a fun derby for sure.
Yeah, yeah. After that, we've got Ipswich away. How do you see that going?
I think this is where we're gonna drop points. The other thing we have to keep in mind is which teams are going to be playing, right? So obviously Conference League is going to be Team B, but we have enough to win there, and we should. I've said we're going to drop points against Everton because I think Team A is a bit weak, where Sean Dyche's guys can actually exploit. So for me, Fulham and Ipswich, one of these is going to go a bit awry because he's going to rotate and we're going to drop points. And I think that'll be against
Okay.
Ipswich.
Okay. Your logic is sound. I still think that given the position on the table, given the fact that we have felt that there are games where we should be drawing and the squad has shown up. I think we should be beating these are the matches where we've dropped points that would have counted in previous seasons. So when it's a low ranked opponent, I want us to beat them, and I think Ipswich should be one of those that we win. We then have Palace in the new year, away. Now that's the game that I think it was a draw earlier on where we said we should have won that. We had a lot of chances, and then the game swung the other way and they had a lot of chances, and then we were like, oh, maybe we're lucky to have, got the draw. But I think now, given I'm hoping that the team is fairly settled by then, that we should be able to beat Palace and um, you know, get a handy 3 points there. What about you?
So you're predicting wins. Are there any games that you're actually predicting us to drop points in?
No, I don't think so. I mean, call it call it just recency bias. But like I said, I'm really pumped after Spurs. And I think the squad is really showing that they do have what it takes. It's silly to call us title challengers. I would not even say we're going to challenge for the title, but when I look at the relative positions of the teams we're coming up against, if it was a top six team here instead of one of these guys, I might have said okay, draw or loss. But when it's Ipswich and Fulham and Palace, I think we should be beating these guys.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily about what we should, it's what you think will happen. So anyway, right? It's I guess it's down to me to make sure that the expectations are being tempered a bit, as usual. So I will go with draws against Ipswich and Palace. And I
And then we
think
have the
yeah, we wanted to wrap up with the FA Cup game, right? That should be a win. I mean, hopefully we see some youngsters in that game as well.
yeah, yeah. Given how he's been going with the squad recently and like how it was with Astana, we should see some youngsters in that game for sure.
Yeah, so Prashant, you've basically got an extremely exciting December and early Jan. More wins for you to celebrate. So, yeah, maybe some Strepsils for your throat is a good idea.
Yes, sir. Thanks for the suggestion. And happy holidays to everyone, man. I think we're going to be back after the Morecambe game in time for Bournemouth. And we should, hopefully, we're sitting in a similar position, having got, what is it, how many Premier League games? Like five Premier League games, so what, 15 points more? Should be sitting up there at the top of the table, close to the
I
top of the table.
I think if you're saying we're getting 15 points, right? If you're going 100% over these games we predicted, you're looking at cementing second place potentially. I mean, looking at the issues that teams around us are having with their squads, and again looking at how well the Team A Team B thing is working. Mate, second place should be Chelsea's.
Yeah, it's early days. I don't want to. I'm obviously a lot more optimistic, and I don't want to say that is what's going to happen. But I don't see why not with that run. With that run, honestly, okay. If I had to temper expectations, the toughest game we have in this run is probably the Brentford game.
No, don't worry. You never have to temper expectations on this pod. That will be my right and my duty. And like you did mention Liverpool Everton was called off, which means they both have a game in hand. And Liverpool right now
Yes.
sitting pretty at the top, 4 points clear of Chelsea. But you know what? It's good to be back in the top four. I will say that much. So on
Yeah.
that note, I think we're gonna sign off from We Burn Blue. It's been a pleasure, and like Prashant said, happy holidays to everybody, and yeah, we'll see you guys in January.